A storm was brewing in American politics, and no one saw it coming. California Governor Gavin Newsom fired the first shot with a tweet that would ignite a political firestorm unlike anything the nation had witnessed in decades. The words appeared on screens across America at 6:47 a.m. Pacific Time. Callous, heartless. While immigrant families face terror and separation, J.D. Vance celebrates at Disney World. This is who leads us. Attached was a photograph that seemed damning. Vice President J.D. Vance, grinning widely, surrounded by cheerful children in front of Cinderella's castle, Mickey Mouse ears perched on his head. Within 17 minutes, the tweet had been retweeted 43,000 times. Within an hour, cable news networks interrupted their morning programming. Breaking news banners scrolled endlessly. Vance under fire, Disney trip during immigration crisis. Governor Newsom questions VP's priorities. Is this leadership? In Los Angeles, protesters materialized outside the federal building before 9 a.m. Their hastily made signs reading "Families in cages," "Vance in Fantasyland," and "Where is your heart, Mr. Vice President?" A grandmother in Phoenix turned to her daughter, voice trembling. Is this true? Is he really that cold? In Columbus, Ohio, a construction worker stared at his phone in disbelief, unable to reconcile the man he'd voted for with the monster Newsom described. But in a suite at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort, J.D. Vance sat motionless, phone in hand, reading Newsom's words for the third time. His Secret Service detail exchanged nervous glances. His chief of staff stood frozen by the window. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was only 47 seconds. Then Vance spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. He has no idea what he's just done. The aide stepped forward. Sir, we need to respond immediately. The narrative is spinning out of control. Vance set his phone down carefully, deliberately. His face betrayed no anger, no panic, just an eerie calm that unsettled everyone in the room. Get me everything we have on Operation Sanctuary Shield, he said quietly. Every document, every wire transfer, every encrypted communication. And someone find out who leaked my schedule to Newsom's team, because this was planned. His press secretary's face went pale. Sir, are you saying Newsom coordinated this? Vance stood, walked to the window, and gazed out at the Magic Kingdom below. Children ran toward the castle, their laughter faint but clear through the glass. He wanted me here. He needed me here. And now he's about to learn why that was the biggest miscalculation of his political life. In CNN's Atlanta headquarters, producers scrambled to book guests. The story was exploding faster than anything they'd seen since the last presidential election. MSNBC brought on child advocacy groups. Fox News lined up immigration hardliners. Every network played the Disney photo on loop, each frame dissected for meaning. Look at his smile, one commentator sneered. Not a care in the world while families are destroyed. Another voice, more measured but equally damning. The optics are catastrophic. Even if there's context we're missing, this image will define him. In Sacramento, Governor Newsom's office buzzed with energy. Staffers high-fived. Donors called with congratulations. The governor himself stood before a wall of monitors, watching his tweets spread like wildfire across the digital landscape. This is how you control the narrative, he told his communications director. You hit hard, you hit first, and you make them defensive. By the time Vance responds, we've already won. His chief strategist nodded approvingly. Sir, you've just positioned yourself as the moral voice against Trump's administration. The 2028 primary starts today. But a junior aide new to the team raised a tentative hand. Governor, what if there's more to the Disney trip? What if Vance was there for a reason we don't know about? The room fell silent. Newsom turned slowly, his expression hardening. Then he should have announced it. He should have controlled his own story. His failure is our opportunity. Dismissed. As the aide left, another staffer whispered, should we be concerned about blowback? Newsom's smile was razor thin. From what? The truth. He was at Disney World during an immigration surge. That's not spin. That's fact. But miles away, in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., federal agents were having a very different conversation. The files spread across the conference table told a story Newsom's team hadn't anticipated. A story about California's emergency relief funds, about shell corporations, about money trails leading to organizations that funded attacks on federal property. The lead investigator tapped a document marked top secret. If this goes public, she said quietly, Newsom won't just lose politically. He'll lose everything. Her supervisor leaned back, conflicted. We need authorization to move forward. This implicates a sitting governor. The investigator's jaw tightened. And if we wait, he uses this Vance controversy to rebuild his image while committing fraud with taxpayer money. How is that justice? Outside the hospital room where Emily Martinez lay fighting leukemia, a nurse checked her phone and gasped. Oh no. Oh God, no. Her colleague looked up from charting medications. What is it? The nurse showed her screen. They're saying Vice President Vance was here yesterday being heartless and uncaring, that he was just doing a photo op. Her colleague's face flushed with anger. That man spent 4 hours here. He held Emily's hand through her worst pain episode. He made her laugh for the first time in weeks. He gave his personal number to her mother and said to call any time. The first nurse's hands trembled. This is a lie. This is a complete lie. Then we need to say something. We can't let them destroy him for being kind. But speaking out meant risking their jobs, bucking the hospital's media policy, and entering a political firestorm that could consume their lives. The first nurse looked toward Emily's room, where the little girl slept peacefully, a photo of her with Vice President Vance taped to the wall. She made a decision. I'm calling a reporter. In Mar-a-Lago, President Donald Trump watched the coverage with narrowed eyes. His advisors stood around him, waiting for the eruption they knew was coming. They're trying to destroy JD, Trump said flatly. Newsom sees 2028 and he's making his move early. The White House chief of staff stepped forward. Mr. President, should we issue a statement supporting the vice president? Trump waved him off. JD doesn't need me to fight his battles. He's got something planned. I can tell you don't sit quiet like this unless you're holding cards. One advisor newer to the inner circle spoke up nervously. Sir, with respect, the longer the vice president stays silent, the more damage this does. Every hour that passes, Newsom's narrative solidifies. Trump's smile was thin and knowing. You don't understand JD like I do. He doesn't react. He calculates. And when he moves, it's devastating. Mark my words, by this time tomorrow, Newsom will wish he'd never sent that tweet. Back at the Grand Floridian, Vance's team had transformed the suite into a makeshift war room. Laptops covered every surface. Secure phones rang constantly. Legal documents formed neat stacks on the dining table. The vice president sat in the center of it all, reading through a file labeled California Financial Irregularities, his expression growing darker with each page. How long have we known about this? He asked without looking up. His counsel cleared her throat. The FBI opened the preliminary investigation 4 months ago. They briefed us 3 weeks ago. We've been waiting for the right moment to act. Vance closed the file carefully, and Newsom just gave us that moment. But sir, his press secretary interjected, if we release this now, it looks like retaliation. It looks like we're deflecting from the Disney criticism. Vance finally looked up, his gaze steady and cold. It's not retaliation if it's true, and it's not deflection if I explain exactly why I was at Disney World. His chief of staff leaned forward. Sir, are you planning to disclose the Make-A-Wish visit? Vance nodded slowly. Every detail. Emily's name with her family's permission, the other children, the hours I spent there, the promises I made. His voice grew quieter but harder. Newsom wanted to make this about character. Let's have that conversation. Let's talk about a man who spent taxpayer money funding violence while sick children suffered. Let's talk about who really lacks compassion. The room went silent as the implications sank in. You're going nuclear, the chief of staff whispered. Vance stood, buttoning his suit jacket. No, I'm going honest. There's a difference. Prepare a full press conference for tomorrow morning. And get me Emily's parents on the phone. I need their permission to tell her story. As his team scrambled to execute, Vance walked to the balcony alone. The Florida night was humid and thick, the distant sounds of fireworks from the Magic Kingdom echoing across the lagoon. Children's laughter carried on the breeze. He thought of Emily's face when he'd walked into her hospital room unannounced, the way her eyes had lit up despite the pain, the strength in her small hand when she'd gripped his. Don't let the bad people win, Mr. Vance, she'd whispered. Promise me. I promise, he'd told her. And he meant it. Behind him, his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, a whistleblower from California's state government. I have proof of everything. Wire transfers, emails, audio recordings. I'm ready to come forward. Vance stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a single word. When? The response came immediately. Whenever you need me. Vance pocketed his phone and returned inside. "Get me the FBI director," he told his chief of staff. "It's time." In Sacramento, Gavin Newsom was celebrating with champagne and California's political elite. Donors clinked glasses. Consultants praised his tactical brilliance. The governor himself held court, basking in what he believed was his finest moment. "You've wounded him badly," one donor said with admiration. "Vance can't recover from this." Newsom's smile was confident, almost smug. "By tomorrow, we'll have think pieces in every major publication about Trump's callous administration. J.D. Vance will be a punchline." But in the corner, that same junior aide stared at her tablet, her face growing increasingly pale. "Governor," she said quietly, trying to get his attention. "Governor." Newsom waved her off mid-story about outmaneuvering Republicans in Sacramento. "Governor," she said louder, her voice cracking. "It's urgent." The room fell silent. Newsom turned, irritation flashing across his face. "What?" She held up her tablet with shaking hands. "A nurse from Orlando just posted a video about why Vice President Vance was really at Disney World." Newsom's expression didn't change. "So, some damage control, we expected that." The aide's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sir, he was visiting children with terminal illnesses through Make-A-Wish. He spent hours with them. There are photos, videos, testimonials from families. And there's a little girl named Emily who has leukemia." He held her hand through a pain crisis. The governor in Sacramento stared at his aide, the champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips as the first cracks appeared in his carefully constructed narrative. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh God." Another pulled out their phone, frantically searching. Within seconds, the video was found. Nurse Jessica Chen's face filled the screen, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stood in a hospital corridor. "I have to speak up," she began, her voice shaking but determined. "What Governor Newsom tweeted about Vice President Vance is not just wrong, it's cruel. Yesterday, J.D. Vance spent 4 hours in our pediatric oncology ward. He wasn't doing a photo op. He specifically requested no press, no cameras from his team. The only photos that exist are because parents wanted to remember the moment their dying children met someone who actually cared." The video cut to a photo. Vance kneeling beside a wheelchair, his forehead pressed against a young boy's, both of them with eyes closed. The child, no more than 7, wore a hospital gown and had no hair. Another photo showed Vance sitting on a hospital bed, a little girl in his lap reading her a story. Emily Martinez, age 9, fighting her 3rd recurrence of leukemia. Nurse Chen's voice continued over the images. "He held her hand during a pain episode that lasted 40 minutes. He didn't leave. He didn't check his phone. He stayed and told her stories about his own children until the medication kicked in. When she asked if he'd promised to fight for kids like her, he cried. The Vice President of the United States cried and promised her he would never stop fighting." The video cut back to Nurse Chen, her expression fierce. "So Governor Newsom can lie all he wants about optics and politics, but I was there. I saw a man who treated these children like they were his own. And the fact that anyone would twist that into something ugly makes me sick." The video ended. In Newsom's office, nobody spoke. The governor slowly set down his champagne glass. His hand trembled slightly. "How many views?" he asked quietly. The aide checked her tablet. 3 million in the last 20 minutes. It's been picked up by every major news outlet. Fox is running it on loop. CNN just issued a correction to their earlier coverage. A senior advisor stepped forward, his face grim. "Governor, we need to issue a statement immediately. An apology, a clarification, something." Newsom's jaw tightened. "No, we double down. We say this doesn't change the fact that his policies are harmful." His communications director shook his head slowly. "Sir, with respect, that won't work. The narrative has shifted. If we attack him now, we look like we're going after a man for visiting sick children." Another donor, one of the largest contributors to Newsom's campaign, stood abruptly. "Gavin, I need to speak with you privately." Now, they stepped into an adjoining office. The donor closed the door and turned, his expression hard. "What the hell were you thinking?" Newsom bristled. "I was thinking I'd take down a political opponent using his own actions against him." The donor's laugh was bitter. "You went after a man for visiting dying children. Do you understand how that plays? Across every demographic, every political affiliation. You've made yourself the villain in a story where the only victims are kids with cancer." "I didn't know," Newsom said, his voice rising. "How could I have known he requested no press?" The donor's expression turned cold. That's not my problem. My problem is that I've donated millions to your future presidential campaign, and in one tweet you've made yourself radioactive. Expect my team to reach out about redirecting our contributions." He walked out, leaving Newsom alone. The governor gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. Through the door he could hear his staffers arguing in hushed, panicked tones. His phone buzzed, text messages pouring in, allies distancing themselves, donors asking questions, media requesting statements, and then a notification that made his blood run cold. Vice President Vance announces press conference for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern. Topic: Leadership, Compassion, and California's Betrayal of Trust. Newsom's chief of staff appeared in the doorway. "Sir, what do you want to do?" The governor stared at his reflection in the darkened window. For the first time in his political career, he had no answer. Across the country, in living rooms and offices, on phones and tablets, Americans were watching Nurse Chen's video. A grandfather in Nebraska wiped his eyes. "I judged him wrong. I judged him completely wrong." A progressive activist in Portland sat in stunned silence, confronting the realization that she'd participated in spreading a lie. A conservative commentator who'd been preparing to defend Vance for entirely different reasons found himself genuinely moved. "This isn't about politics anymore," he said on air, his voice thick. "This is about basic human decency, and we nearly destroyed a man for showing it." In the hospital where Emily slept, her mother received a call from Vance's office. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Chief of Staff Bradley Morrison with Vice President Vance's office. I know this is overwhelming, but we need to ask your permission for something." Emily's mother gripped the phone. "What is it?" "The vice president wants to hold a press conference tomorrow morning to respond to Governor Newsom's accusations. To do that effectively, he'd like permission to tell Emily's story, to explain why he was at the hospital, what he saw, what he felt, but only with your explicit consent." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're asking me if it's okay to tell the truth." "Ma'am, we're asking if it's okay to make your daughter part of a national political story. That comes with attention, scrutiny, and pressure you might not want." She looked through the window at her daughter, small and fragile in the hospital bed, the photo of her with Vance still taped to the wall. "Mr. Morrison, my daughter has been fighting for her life for 3 years. She's been poked, prodded, poisoned with chemotherapy, and told she might not see her 10th birthday. If her story can show people what real leadership looks like, if it can make even one person think differently about compassion, then yes. Tell the world about Emily." The chief of staff's voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mrs. Martinez. The vice president will honor your trust, I promise you that." After they hung up, Emily's mother sat in the darkness of the hospital room, listening to her daughter's steady breathing. A nurse poked her head in. "The video's gone viral, you know. The one about what the vice president really did here." Emily's mother nodded. "I know." The nurse hesitated. "The country's going to be watching tomorrow. That's a lot of pressure." Emily's mother looked at her daughter, then back at the nurse. "My baby has survived 3 rounds of aggressive chemotherapy, 2 major surgeries, and more pain than most adults will ever experience. Trust me, we can handle pressure." In Washington, President Trump called Vance directly. "JD, I just watched that nurse's video." The vice president's voice was quiet. "Yes, sir." Trump was uncharacteristically subdued. "You know, I've been in politics my entire adult life. I've seen dirty tricks, low blows, character assassinations. But going after a man for visiting sick kids, that's a new low even for Newsom." Vance didn't respond. Trump continued. "Tomorrow, when you step up to that podium, don't hold back. Not on the children, not on what you saw, and sure as hell not on whatever you've got on Newsom. Because I know you, JD. You don't schedule a press conference unless you're holding a royal flush." A slight smile crossed Vance's face. "Mr. President, I just want to tell the truth." Trump's laugh was sharp. "Truth is fine, but make sure the truth hurts him as badly as he tried to hurt you." When they hung up, Vance returned to his laptop, reviewing the presentation his team had prepared for tomorrow. Photos of Emily, testimonials from families, timeline of his hospital visit. And then, the second part of the presentation. The part Newsom hadn't seen coming. Financial documents showing California state funds diverted to shell corporations. Wire transfers to organizations that staged violent protests at federal buildings. Encrypted emails between Newsom's office and activist coordinators. Communications proving the governor had deliberately provoked chaos to undermine federal immigration enforcement. Vance's legal counsel stood beside him. "Sir, releasing this much classified information about an ongoing FBI investigation is unprecedented. It could jeopardize the case." Vance's eyes never left the screen. "Then the FBI needs to move faster. Because every day this man operates as governor, he's stealing from Californians and endangering federal agents. If my press conference forces their hand, so be it. But sir," his counsel pressed, "this crosses a line. You're using your office to target a political opponent." Vance finally looked up, his expression hard. "A political opponent attacked me for showing compassion to dying children. That same opponent has been committing financial fraud and conspiracy to incite violence. I'm not targeting him, I'm exposing him. There's a difference." The counsel nodded slowly, recognizing the determination in Vance's voice. "Then let's make sure every piece of evidence is airtight. We get one shot at this." Through the night, Vance's team worked. Legal reviewed every document. Communications crafted the precise messaging. Press liaison coordinated with dozens of media outlets. At 3 a.m., Vance stood alone in his hotel suite, looking at a photo on his phone. Emily gripping his hand, her eyes closed against pain, trusting him completely. He'd made her a promise. Tomorrow he'd begin keeping it. In Sacramento, Gavin Newsom couldn't sleep. He sat in his home office, scrolling through social media, watching his carefully constructed narrative collapse. Everywhere he looked, people were sharing Nurse Chen's video. Everywhere he turned, the conversation had shifted from Vance's supposed callousness to Newsom's apparent cruelty. His wife found him there at 4 a.m. "Gavin, come to bed. You need to rest." He didn't look away from the screen. "I made a mistake." She sat beside him, her expression concerned. "You can apologize. You can clarify. People will understand." Newsom shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. Vance's press conference isn't about the Disney trip. That nurse's video already won him that battle. Tomorrow is about something else, something I'm not prepared for." "What do you mean?" He finally met her eyes. "I mean that J.D. Vance is too smart to call a major press conference just to defend himself. He's going on offense. And I think I know what he has." His wife's face paled. "The funding investigations." Newsom's silence was answer enough. The dawn broke over Washington, D.C., gray and threatening rain. Camera crews set up outside the Eisenhower Executive Office building hours before the scheduled press conference. Reporters from every major outlet, international press, independent journalists, everyone who could get credentials was there. Inside, Vance dressed carefully, precisely. Navy suit, red tie, American flag pin, the uniform of his office worn with intention. His chief of staff knocked softly. "Sir, the room is packed. We've got overflow crowds in 3 adjoining spaces. Networks are carrying it live. Social media is lit up." Vance nodded, checking his notes one final time. "And Emily's mother, she's on the line, ready to be patched in if needed. She wants you to know she's praying for you." Vance smiled slightly. "Tell her I'm praying for Emily." His press secretary entered. "Sir, there's something you should know. Governor Newsom's office just released a preemptive statement." Vance raised an eyebrow. "Read it." The secretary cleared her throat. "While I acknowledge that Vice President Vance's visit to sick children was admirable, this doesn't change the fundamental cruelty of this administration's immigration policies. Families are still being separated. Children are still suffering. I stand by my criticism of the policies, even as I recognize the Vice President's personal kindness." Vance's chief of staff swore under his breath. "He's trying to have it both ways, admitting he was wrong about you while still attacking the administration." Vance set down his notes. "Clever. It's actually quite clever, but it won't be enough." His communications director leaned forward. "Sir, how do you want to handle that in your opening?" Vance's smile was cold. "I'm not going to mention it at all. I'm not here to respond to Gavin Newsom anymore. I'm here to show America who he really is." At 8:47 a.m., Vance walked into the press room. The assembled journalists fell silent. Camera flashes erupted. He stepped to the podium, looked directly into the cameras, and began. "Good morning. 26 hours ago, Governor Gavin Newsom of California sent a tweet accusing me of being callous and heartless for visiting Disney World during what he termed an immigration crisis. That tweet was accompanied by a photograph and was designed to paint me as someone who lacks compassion, who celebrates while families suffer." He paused, letting the words hang. I want to address that accusation directly, not because I owe Governor Newsom an explanation, but because the American people deserve the truth. Behind him, a screen lit up with a photo. Vance kneeling beside Emily's wheelchair, both of them smiling. This is Emily Martinez. She is 9 years old. She has been fighting leukemia for 3 years. On the day Governor Newsom accused me of being heartless, I spent 4 hours at a hospital in Orlando visiting Emily and 11 other children with terminal and life-threatening illnesses through the Make-A-Wish Foundation. The room was dead silent, every eye fixed on the vice president. I specifically requested no press coverage, no official photographs, no public announcement. This wasn't a photo opportunity. It was a promise I made to these families that despite my office and responsibilities, I would show up for their children the same way any neighbor or friend would. Another photo appeared. Vance reading to a young boy. That's Marcus. He's 7. He has an inoperable brain tumor. He asked me to read him his favorite book, Where the Wild Things Are. So I did, twice. Because the first time he said I didn't do the voices right. A few reporters smiled through their tears. Vance's expression remained serious. This is Sophia. She's 6. She's fighting a rare genetic disorder that's destroyed her nervous system. She can barely speak, but she managed to ask me one question. She asked if people in charge still care about kids like her. I told her yes. I told her I cared. I told her America cared. His voice grew harder. And then I saw Governor Newsom's tweet. I saw him take the single photo that existed of my visit, a photo taken by a grateful parent, and weaponize it. I watched him lie to millions of Americans about my character, my heart, and my values. The room shifted uncomfortably. But here's what Governor Newsom didn't know. Here's what he couldn't have anticipated. The screen changed to show Nurse Jessica Chen. The nurses and doctors who cared for these children. They saw what really happened. They saw a vice president who held a 9-year-old girl's hand for 40 minutes during a pain crisis, who cried when she asked him to promise he'd fight for kids like her, who gave his personal phone number to terrified parents and said, "Call me anytime." Vance leaned forward slightly. So yes, Governor Newsom, I was at Disney World. I was there keeping a promise to children who have suffered more in their short lives than most adults will ever know. And if that makes me callous in your eyes, then I'll wear that accusation with pride. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Vance raised his hand. But I'm not here just to defend myself. I'm here to talk about leadership, about character, and about what's really been happening in California while Governor Newsom has been busy attacking me. The screen behind him changed again. Financial documents, wire transfers, encrypted emails. The press room went absolutely silent. For the past 4 months, he began, voice steady and cold, the FBI has been investigating massive financial irregularities in California state government. Specifically, they've been following money from California's Emergency Relief Fund, money that was supposed to help homeless families, low-income workers, and struggling communities. He clicked to the next slide. Instead, that money, over $2.4 billion, was diverted to shell corporations and front organizations. Those organizations then funded protests, legal defense for repeat violent offenders, and in some cases, direct attacks on federal property and federal agents. Reporters scrambled to take notes. Others held up phones to record. Vance continued, his tone never rising, never falling, unshakable. Governor Newsom personally approved many of these transfers. His office coordinated with activist groups to create chaos at the border, to provoke confrontations with federal immigration enforcement, all with the goal of making this administration look cruel and incompetent. He paused, letting that sink in. In other words, while I was holding the hand of a dying child, Gavin Newsom was stealing billions from California's most vulnerable citizens to fund political theater and violence. The press room erupted into chaos. "Mr. Vice President, these are extraordinary allegations. Do you have proof?" Vance's smile was thin. "Everything you see behind me has been provided to the FBI, the Department of Justice, and as of 10 minutes ago, the House Oversight Committee. Governor Newsom will have the opportunity to defend himself. But make no mistake, these are not allegations. These are facts." Another reporter shouted, "Sir, isn't this retaliation? Isn't this just political payback for his tweet?" Vance's expression hardened. Retaliation would be tweeting something mean back at Governor Newsom. Retaliation would be attacking his policies or his record. This is accountability. This is showing the American people that the man who accused me of lacking compassion has been systematically betraying the people he was elected to serve. The questions kept coming, rapid fire and overlapping. Vice President, what happens next? Are charges being filed? Will Governor Newsom resign? Vance held up his hand again. What happens next is up to the FBI and the Department of Justice. My role was simply to ensure that this information became public, that Americans understood the full context of Governor Newsom's attacks, and that we stopped allowing corrupt politicians to hide behind false compassion. He glanced down at his notes, then back up at the cameras. I want to close by reading you something. This is from a letter Emily's mother sent me this morning. She gave me permission to share it. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. My daughter has been fighting cancer for 3 years. In that time, we've met countless doctors, nurses, celebrities, and politicians. Some visit for photos. Some come because they think they should. But when Vice President Vance sat with Emily, he wasn't there as the vice president. He was there as a father, as a human being, as someone who genuinely cared whether my daughter lived or died. When he cried with her, those weren't political tears. When he promised to fight for kids like her, it wasn't a campaign slogan. And when Governor Newsom attacked him for showing my daughter compassion, he attacked every sick child who's ever been told they don't matter. Vance's voice caught slightly as he read the last line. Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for seeing my daughter as a person, not a photo opportunity. Thank you for keeping your promises. And thank you for showing America what real leadership looks like. He folded the paper carefully, deliberately. That's why I'm here today. Not to defend myself, not to attack Governor Newsom for political gain, but to make sure that Emily and children like her know that their stories matter, that their lives matter, and that the people who claim to lead this country will be held accountable when they betray the public trust. He stepped back from the podium. That's all I have to say. Thank you. The room exploded. Every reporter on their feet, questions shouting over each other, cameras flashing like lightning. Vance walked out without looking back. In his hotel room, Gavin Newsom sat frozen, watching the press conference on 6 different screens simultaneously. His phone rang incessantly. His staffers stood in shocked silence. The financial documents on the screen behind Vance were real. Newsom recognized them. Some had his signature. Some had notes in his handwriting, and they were now public across every network, in every newspaper, on every social media platform. His chief of staff finally spoke, voice shaking. Governor, the FBI is requesting you make yourself available for questioning. Newsom didn't respond. The Attorney General's office is asking for comment. Donors are issuing statements distancing themselves from your campaign. 3 state senators have called for your resignation. Still, Newsom stared at the screens, watching the clips of Vance's press conference replay over and over. That night, across America, families gathered around dinner tables and talked. Not about politics in the abstract. Not about party platforms or policy debates, but about Emily, about Marcus and Sophia and the other children, about what it meant to lead with compassion, about the difference between saying you care and actually caring. A factory worker in Michigan who'd voted for Trump reluctantly found herself crying at the images of Vance with those sick children. A progressive college student in Berkeley who'd retweeted Newsom's original attack posted an apology. I got caught up in politics and forgot to check the facts. I'm sorry. A grandmother in Atlanta called her grandson, a Marine stationed overseas. That Vance, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That's the kind of man we need leading. The grandson, who'd been skeptical of the administration, found himself agreeing. In hospitals across the country, nurses and doctors watched the press conference and nodded. That's what we see every day, one pediatric oncologist said to her colleagues. The difference between people who use sick kids for publicity and people who actually care. Emily's story became a rallying cry, not for a political party or an ideology, but for basic human decency. Social media exploded with stories of other times Vance had shown up for people without cameras, without press releases, without fanfare. A veteran whose funeral he'd attended quietly. A teacher who'd lost her home in a fire and received an anonymous donation that was later traced to the vice president. A community devastated by flooding where Vance had spent 2 days loading sandbags, refusing Secret Service suggestions that it was too dangerous. He's been doing this all along, a reporter observed on CNN. We just weren't paying attention. Meanwhile, in California, the political earthquake was just beginning. Federal agents arrived at the state capitol with warrants. Newsom's closest aides were being subpoenaed. Documents were being seized. And most damaging of all, whistleblowers were coming forward. Former staffers who'd been uncomfortable with what they'd seen but afraid to speak. Accountants who'd raised red flags only to be silenced. Activists who'd been paid to incite violence and now felt used. One by one, they told their stories. And one by one, they all pointed back to Governor Gavin Newsom. His approval rating plummeted 23 points in 48 hours. Donors fled. Allies distanced themselves. Within a week, there were serious discussions about recall petitions. The man who tried to take down Vance with a single tweet had instead destroyed his own political future. And through it all, Vance remained focused on Emily. He called her mother daily. He sent cards and gifts to the other children he'd visited. He pushed legislation to increase funding for pediatric cancer research. He didn't gloat. He didn't do victory laps. He simply kept the promises he'd made to a 9-year-old girl fighting for her life. 3 weeks after the press conference, on a sunny afternoon in Orlando, Emily Martinez took her first steps unaided in 6 months. Her mother called Vance immediately. "He's in a meeting with the president," his secretary said gently. "Can I take a message?" "Tell him Emily walked today," her mother said through tears of joy. "Tell him she's winning." When Vance got the message, he excused himself from the Oval Office, stepped into a hallway and cried. President Trump found him there 10 minutes later. "JD?" Vance wiped his eyes, embarrassed. "Sorry, Mr. President. Emily, the little girl from the hospital, she walked today." Trump, who'd seen Vance navigate complex international negotiations without blinking, who'd watched him face down hostile senators without flinching, looked at his vice president with newfound respect. That's what this was all about, wasn't it? Not destroying Newsom, not winning the political battle. That little girl. Vance nodded. That little girl and every other kid who's been told they don't matter, who's been used as a political prop, who's been forgotten by people who claim to care. Trump clapped him on the shoulder. "Come on. Let's get back in there and figure out how to get more funding for pediatric research. Because if we're going to keep promises to kids like Emily, we need to back it up with action." As they walked back to the Oval Office together across the country in a hospital room in Orlando, Emily Martinez held her mother's hand and smiled. "Mr. Vance kept his promise," she whispered. "I knew he would." Her mother kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, he did." In Sacramento, Gavin Newsom sat in his office, now empty of staff and allies, staring at legal documents, formal charges, investigations, the complete unraveling of everything he'd built. And all because he'd attacked a man for visiting sick children. All because he'd underestimated the power of genuine compassion. All because he'd forgotten that in the end, truth and character matter more than tactics and spin. The rest of Newsom's political career would be spent in courtrooms and hearings, trying to defend the indefensible. J.D. Vance never mentioned him again publicly. He didn't need to. The contrast spoke for itself. 6 months later, Emily went into remission. Vance attended her celebration party, arriving quietly with no press, no cameras, just as before. Emily ran to him, her hair starting to grow back, her smile radiant. "You kept your promise," she said, hugging him tight. "Always," Vance replied. "Always." And in that moment, watching a little girl who'd beaten impossible odds celebrate life, surrounded by family and friends and a vice president who'd become a friend, everyone in that room understood what real leadership looked like. It wasn't about power plays or political theater. It wasn't about winning the news cycle or destroying opponents. It was about showing up for people when they needed you most. It was about keeping promises to 9-year-old girls fighting cancer. It was about having the courage to do what's right, even when it wasn't convenient or popular. Across America, in living rooms and diners, in factories and offices, people watched the photos of Emily's celebration circulate on social media. And they nodded, understanding in a way that transcended politics. "That's the kind of leader we need," they said. "That's the kind of person who deserves to represent us. Not someone who uses sick children as political weapons, but someone who treats them with the dignity and compassion every human being deserves." J.D. Vance never spoke about the Newsom incident again. He didn't write a book about it. He didn't give interviews rehashing the drama. He simply continued doing what he'd always done, showing up, keeping promises, leading with integrity. And years later, when Emily Martinez graduated from high school, healthy and strong, Vance was there in the audience. Not as vice president anymore, but as a friend. As someone who'd seen her at her lowest and promised she'd make it through. Who'd kept that promise in the face of political attacks and personal cost. She mentioned him in her valedictorian speech. "There was a time," she said, her voice clear and strong, "when I didn't think I'd live to see this day. When the pain was so bad, I wanted to give up. But someone showed me that even in our darkest moments, we're not alone. That there are people who care, truly care, about whether we survive and thrive." She looked directly at Vance, sitting with her family. "Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Not just for visiting me that day, but for proving that kindness isn't weakness, that compassion isn't political, and that keeping promises to children matters." The auditorium erupted in applause. Vance wiped his eyes, just as he had years before in that hospital room. But what the audience didn't know, what even Emily's family was only learning now, was that the story hadn't ended with that press conference years ago. The ripples from that single moment of truth had continued to spread, touching lives in ways no one had anticipated. In the weeks following Vance's devastating press conference, 3 more California officials had resigned, not because they were forced to, but because their consciences wouldn't let them stay silent anymore. They'd seen what Newsom had done. They'd participated, however reluctantly, in the schemes that diverted funds meant for struggling families into political warfare. One of them, a mid-level bureaucrat named David Chen, had walked into FBI headquarters with boxes of documents. His hands had trembled as he set them on the conference table. "I can't do this anymore," he'd told the agents. "I have kids. I can't look them in the eye and pretend I didn't know what was happening." The documents Chen provided showed an even darker picture than what Vance had revealed. Not just billions diverted for political protests, but a systematic effort to weaponize California's social services against the federal government. Foster care placements deliberately sabotaged. Housing assistance denied to families based on political affiliation. Emergency relief funds held hostage unless recipients agreed to participate in anti-administration demonstrations. It was corruption on a scale that stunned even seasoned federal investigators. And at the center of it all was Gavin Newsom, his signature on approval after approval, his notes in margins outlining strategy, his voice on recordings discussing how to maximize damage to the Trump administration, even if it meant California families suffered in the short term. "The long-term goal is power," Newsom's voice said on one particularly damning recording. "If we have to let some people hurt now to take back the White House in 2028, that's a price I'm willing to pay." When that recording leaked, 3 weeks after Vance's press conference, even Newsom's most loyal defenders fell silent. A single mother in Fresno, who'd been denied housing assistance despite qualifying, heard that recording and broke down sobbing. "My kids slept in our car for 4 months," she told a local news crew. 4 months because I wouldn't go to their protests, because I just wanted to take care of my children, not play politics. Her story became one of hundreds, thousands, a flood of Californians coming forward with tales of how Newsom's political ambitions had destroyed their lives. A veteran denied PTSD treatment because he'd posted support for Trump on social media. A teacher who lost her pension because she refused to use her classroom for political organizing. A family whose disabled son was removed from a specialized care program as retaliation for the father's criticism of sanctuary city policies. Each story, individually, was heartbreaking. Collectively, they painted a portrait of a government that had betrayed its most sacred duty, to serve its people without prejudice or political calculation. The FBI investigation expanded. Federal prosecutors convened grand juries, and Gavin Newsom, who'd once been considered a frontrunner for the presidency, found himself fighting for his freedom. His trial began on a cold February morning, 8 months after his attack on J.D. Vance. The courthouse in San Francisco was surrounded by protesters, but unlike the protests Newsom had funded, these were organic, spontaneous, and angry. Justice for California families, their signs read, "No one is above the law. Newsom betrayed us." Inside the courtroom, the prosecution methodically laid out their case. Wire transfers, emails, recorded phone calls, and witness after witness, former allies of Newsom who could no longer stomach what they'd been part of. The defense tried to argue that everything Newsom had done was within his authority as governor, that political decisions about funding weren't criminal just because people disagreed with them. But then the prosecution called their star witness, a woman named Maria Rodriguez, who'd worked in Newsom's office for 6 years as a senior policy advisor. She took the stand with visible reluctance, her hands shaking as she was sworn in. "Ms. Rodriguez," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell us about a meeting that took place in Governor Newsom's office on March 14th, 3 months before his tweet about Vice President Vance?" Maria nodded slowly. "We were discussing the upcoming immigration enforcement surge. The governor was frustrated because polling showed that most Californians, even many Democrats, supported stronger border security. And what did Governor Newsom say about that?" Maria's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He said we needed to create a crisis, that we needed images of families being separated, of children crying, of chaos at the border. He said if we could make it look bad enough, we could turn public opinion." The courtroom went silent. The prosecutor pressed forward. "And how did he propose to create this crisis?" Maria looked directly at Newsom for the first time. "He said we'd fund groups to provoke confrontations with federal agents, make sure there were cameras there, make sure there were families with children, and then we'd use the footage to destroy the administration's credibility. Did you object to this plan?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I did. I told him people could get hurt. That using families, especially children, as political props was unconscionable." She paused, wiping her eyes. "He told me that I needed to think bigger, that a few hurt feelings were nothing compared to stopping Trump's agenda." "What happened next?" "I resigned," Maria said firmly. "That same day. But I didn't go to the authorities. I thought maybe it was just talk, that he wouldn't actually do it." She looked at the jury. "I was wrong, and I'll regret my silence for the rest of my life." The defense tried to discredit her testimony, suggesting she was a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. But then the prosecution produced the recording of that March 14th meeting, and Maria's testimony was confirmed word for word. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, every member looked exhausted, drained by the weight of what they'd heard. "On the charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of misappropriation of federal funds?" "Guilty." "On 37 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of power?" "Guilty, guilty, guilty." Newsom's face remained impassive, but his hands gripped the defense table so hard his knuckles went white. The sentencing hearing came 2 months later. Federal prosecutors requested 25 years. The defense pleaded for leniency, arguing that Newsom's political career was already destroyed, that further punishment served no purpose. But then the judge did something unusual. "Before sentencing, I want to hear from some of the victims." One by one, Californians took the stand. The single mother whose children had slept in their car, the veteran denied mental health treatment, the teacher who lost her pension, a father whose business collapsed after being blacklisted for political reasons. And then, via video link from Orlando, Emily Martinez. She was 16 now, healthy and vibrant, her hair long and dark, her eyes clear. But when she spoke about what she'd learned in the years since Vance's visit, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much of life's darkness too young. "Your Honor," she began, "I was 9 years old when I was fighting cancer. I was in pain every day. I was scared I would die. And then Vice President Vance came to visit me. Not because he had to, not because cameras were there, but because he cared." She paused, composing herself. "Governor Newsom tried to destroy him for that. He lied about why Mr. Vance was there. He used my illness, my pain, as a weapon in his political games. And when I learned that he'd done the same thing to thousands of other families, that he'd deliberately hurt children to make a political point, I realized something. What did you realize, Emily? The judge asked gently. That some people see children as human beings who deserve protection and love, and some people see us as tools to be used and discarded when we're no longer useful. She looked directly at Newsom through the screen. You're the second kind, and people like you shouldn't be in power. The courtroom was silent, except for muffled sobs. The judge removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly, clearly emotional. Mr. Newsom, he said finally, you held one of the highest offices in this nation. You were trusted by millions of people to serve their interests, to protect their welfare, to uphold the law. He put his glasses back on. Instead, you betrayed that trust in the most cynical way imaginable. You weaponized government services. You stole from the poorest and most vulnerable. You deliberately provoked violence and chaos for political gain. And when a man showed compassion to dying children, you attacked him for it. Newsom's lawyer started to object, but the judge raised his hand. I've presided over this court for 23 years. I've seen murderers, drug kingpins, corrupt officials of every stripe, but I have never seen someone abuse power with such calculated cruelty, such complete disregard for human suffering. He looked down at his notes. The prosecution requests 25 years. I'm going to impose 35 years, with no possibility of parole for at least 25. Additionally, you are ordered to make restitution to the state of California in the amount of $2.4 billion, plus damages to individual victims. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Furthermore, the judge continued, you are permanently barred from holding any public office, any position of public trust, or working as a lobbyist or political consultant. You will spend the rest of your productive years behind bars, and when you are released, you will spend the remainder of your life working to repay even a fraction of the harm you've caused. He brought down his gavel. Court is adjourned. As federal marshals led Newsom away in handcuffs, reporters flooded out of the courtroom. The news spread instantly. Social media exploded. Cable news ran special reports. But J.D. Vance, who'd been in a meeting with education officials about pediatric cancer research funding, simply nodded when told the news. Justice was served, he said quietly. Now let's get back to work. The years that followed saw sweeping reforms in California. A new governor, elected in a special election, made transparency and accountability the centerpiece of her administration. Every dollar of state funding was tracked and published online. Whistleblower protections were strengthened. Political retaliation became a criminal offense with mandatory prison time. And across the country, Vance's handling of the Newsom crisis became a case study in leadership. Business schools analyzed his strategic patience. Political science classes examined his tactical precision. Ethics courses used his press conference as an example of speaking truth to power. But more importantly, his example inspired others. A senator in Michigan who'd been silent about corruption in her own party finally came forward, citing Vance's courage. A mayor in Texas who'd been pressured to misuse disaster relief funds refused and went public, saying he wanted to be able to look children in the eye the way Vance had looked at Emily. The culture began to shift, slowly, imperceptibly at first, but unmistakably. The old cynicism, the assumption that all politicians were corrupt and nothing could be done about it, started to crack. People began demanding more from their leaders. Not just policies they agreed with, but character they could trust. Not just winning, but winning the right way. And whenever someone questioned whether integrity still mattered in politics, someone else would bring up J.D. Vance and Emily Martinez. Would talk about a man who'd visited sick children without cameras, who'd been attacked for showing compassion, and who'd responded not with anger but with truth. That story became legend. But for those who'd lived it, it remained intensely personal. Emily's mother kept in touch with Vance over the years, not as constituent to politician, but as friend to friend. He'd call on Emily's birthday every year. He'd sent a handwritten note when Emily got her driver's license. He'd made a video message for her 16th birthday party. And now, watching her graduate, watching her receive scholarship offers from a dozen universities, watching her prepare to go out and change the world, He felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel. Pride, pure, uncomplicated pride in this young woman who'd fought impossible odds and won. After the ceremony, Emily found him in the crowd. She was surrounded by friends and family, all celebrating, but she broke away to give him a hug. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Vance smiled. "Emily, you're the one who fought. You're the one who survived. I just showed up." She pulled back, looking at him seriously. "No, you showed up and then you kept showing up. When it was hard, when people attacked you, when it would have been easier to forget about some sick kid in Florida, you kept your promise." She paused. "That's what changed everything." Around them, parents waited to take photos, friends called out congratulations. But in that moment, it was just the two of them. "You know what I'm going to study in college?" Emily asked. Vance shook his head. "Political science. Because I want to understand how someone like you can exist in politics, how you can be in that world and not become like Newsom. And then I want to be that kind of leader myself." Vance's throat tightened. "Emily, you already are that kind of leader. You've been fighting with grace and courage since you were 6 years old. You don't need to learn that. You just need to stay true to who you are." She smiled. "That's what you did, isn't it? Stayed true to who you are even when it was hard." He nodded slowly. "It's the only way I know how to live." They stood there for a moment longer, this unlikely pair brought together by crisis and bound by mutual respect. A former vice president and a teenage cancer survivor who'd both learned the same lesson, that character matters most when it costs you something to maintain it. As the sun set over the graduation ceremony, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, as Emily stepped into the beginning of her adult life, Vance felt a profound sense of peace. He'd made a promise to a 9-year-old girl in a hospital bed, a promise to fight for her, to protect kids like her, to never let the powerful victimize the vulnerable without consequence. And he'd kept that promise. Through political attacks and media scrutiny, through threats and intimidation, through moments when staying silent would have been so much easier. He'd kept it. And in doing so, he'd shown Emily and millions of other young people that promises still mean something. That truth still matters. That one person with courage can change the world. If this story moved you, if it reminded you what real leadership looks like, don't let this moment pass. Hit that like button to show your support for leaders who keep their promises to the most vulnerable among us. Drop a comment below telling us about a time someone showed up for you when you needed them most. And subscribe to this channel, because we're committed to bringing you stories that cut through the political noise to show you the human beings behind the headlines. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that compassion, integrity, and basic human decency still matter in leadership. Because Emily's story, J.D. Vance's story, this is the America we can be when we choose character over convenience, when we value truth over tactics, when we remember that every child, every family, every person deserves leaders who see them as human beings, not political pawns. So don't just watch and move on. Be part of spreading this message. Comment, subscribe, and share. Let's build a country that honors the Emily Martinez's of the world by demanding leaders worthy of their trust. Let's make sure that the next time a politician tries to attack someone for showing compassion to dying children, America responds with a resounding, "Not in our name. This is who we are. This is what we stand for." And together, we can make sure leaders like J.D. Vance, who keep their promises no matter the cost, know they're not alone. The people are with them. Truth is with them. And in the end, that's what matters most. Join us. Subscribe now. And let's keep fighting for an America worthy of Emily's courage and J.D. Vance's compassion, because that's the country we all deserve.